Hey everyone, just need a few minutes to get everyone inside the meeting and we should be good.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello. We have not met quorum just yet. We need three more and we should be good to go.
Say that again.
I was saying we have not met quorum just yet. We need
All
now we
right.
need two more. And then we're good to go.
Okay. Did you get any communication that anybody was gonna be out? I didn't.
Not anything directly.
Okay.
Good morning, all.
Good morning, Colin.
I don't think we have any items requiring a vote. We didn't get minutes, right?
No, I was trying to think through, do we have somebody assigned to take minutes? Or is that sort of falling on us? Off the top of my head, I think it's us. Because we've had so much transition. I know Christy was doing it and then she left. And I don't know if we ever arrived on a new secretary for the group. But we can go back and get us caught up. Does anybody want to be a secretary for the group? All right, we'll pick it up. Melissa, can you and I tag team this and get us caught up? Like we can pull minutes together. I'll work with Melissa. We'll get some things done.
I know that Tammy is saying that she's having some problems with her audio. You can't hear.
Yeah, I think she dropped out and will come back in. thought, I know we sent invitations out to folks about joining for the white flag planning. I don't see anybody from community safety on. They may be going through the registration process still.
Did you say something, Colin?
Yeah, I was saying, I know we sent out, or invitations were sent to a group of people who had expressed interest in joining us for the white flag planning and discussion, but I'm not seeing them in the meeting. So I'm trying to sort of looking, and I don't see them. So I was just wondering if folks who had expressed an interest in joining the white flag discussion were just caught up going through the registration process, which was taking them longer than they expected. But we can go ahead and get started. And
Helen, did you hear directly from anyone about today's meeting?
I've not heard back from the people that I emailed about it.
Okay, well,
Ryan
we have
Smith,
a fairly the meat of the conversation was the white flag policy
Mhm.
that we agreed to address the first 30 minutes of our meeting. But I did want Colin just to give us our current numbers as it currently stands for people in need of shelter, singles and families, and then we will enter into that white flag conversation.
give me one moment. I will tell you that number.
Amy still can't hear. Not sure what's happening.
We are at 24 families, 9 families with children under the age of 5, and 101 singles unsheltered, 25 of whom are considered medically vulnerable. And then, and that's by self-report in the system. And then 25 families at risk of homelessness in 14 days and 31 singles at risk of homelessness in 14 days.
Did you say 30 singles, Colin?
Give me one moment. 31 singles at risk of homelessness, but the unsheltered homeless singles is 101 and 24 families currently by self-report.
So that was in addition to the 101 unsheltered. We have 31 singles
that are saying they're at risk of homelessness.
Okay. Well, at this time, the floor is open to discuss our current white flag plan. What I do know is that the request that we made of HSAC, that letter has not been completed yet, because it was decided that we needed to come, when we make the ask, we needed to make the ask with a dollar amount. Is that correct, Colin?
Yes, that's sort of what Helen as chair of the HSAC and I were discussing, that sending a generic request to city and county leadership asking for, please support us and help us. They would say, yes, we'll help you and support you. But then the next question is going to be, please tell us specifically what you need. So rather than sending 2 letters, it seemed to make sense as we were talking through it, that once we kind of say, here's our plan, here's what our cost would be on an annual basis, we would like to make a request to the city and county to partner or do something to arrive at X number of dollars to help make this plan a reality. Is that an accurate summation, Helen?
Yes, that's exactly what we talked about. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So how close are we to coming up with a tangible number? Is that gonna happen this year for this current winter season? Or is this still like a future plan?
I think a lot of that comes down to what does the group here come up with as a plan? And is there a plan that can be implemented this year? What would it look like if we were going to try and do it this year? What would it cost for, a portion of this year? Most likely, it's probably going to be, if we come up with a great plan today and say, okay, here's the plan, and we can, by January, we can sort of have a really good number and a plan, we could get a letter sent out. If we don't have a concrete plan that we can actually start putting a budget around, it would be probably a little bit more time consuming. And it's not just a plan, it's also one that's implementable, because we could always say, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to go rent out an entire hotel, and we need $1 million a month for that. But then we got to make sure that we've got, appropriate staff in place and nonprofit partner agencies that either have staff available to run those programs or are interested in bringing on increased staffing for a seasonal position. So there's a lot of moving pieces that we just sort of need to land on what it is that we want to do. Go ahead, Sheldon.
So my question, I guess, would be for Drew and the group. Is there the option for them to be able to have more rooms at their current location if they had the funds to pay for those?
I think so. So I would have to check with the hotel staff. I know
Right.
they've communicated that they have capacity up to 21 or 22 rooms, and I know that when we've done that, we're already pushing their capabilities or what they've offered to us.
Mhm.
So without talking to them directly, the short answer is we're about there, and there might be some flexibility on their end, but I would have to check.
So Drew, how many rooms would that increase us to?
So when we had communicated previously, we were looking at doing White Flag at an extended stay, and they weren't going to be able to guarantee a number of rooms. Even with a week's heads up, they said we can't guarantee any rooms. We landed on the Hometown Suites over on 55, and they said we can, and their rate is significantly better. I want to say it's like $52 or $59 a night. You're going to see an email today about White Flag for this week, and we're going to do 15 rooms. We're requesting that as many of those can be doubles as possible, and they're hopefully going to let us know today. So that's the plan for this block of White Flag is going to be 15 rooms.
I was thinking, and Sheldon, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Were you asking about them increasing their capacity beyond like the current plan of 15 rooms? Is that the question you were asking?
That's where I was going, because it seemed like the step one would be, how can we expand or leverage the group that's already functioning? Can they get more rooms, so have resources for that? Or
I think,
if
yeah,
they
I
needed
think
additional staffing or something, then supporting the group that's already in place as kind of option one.
Yeah, so I think 15 rooms is going to be the kind of spot for us while there's still a number of cold nights on the horizon. Our contract runs through the end of March. So if funding were less of an issue, we could probably bump up to 20 rooms, 21. And I think that would be pushing the capability of what Hometown Suites could provide.
And Drew, if you're going even if, let's just hypothetically pretend Hometown Suites would give you 50 rooms,
Mhm.
would you need additional staff capacity to handle and provide the supportive services to folks in those rooms?
And the current scope of work that we have, yes.
Okay, so it'd be money for rooms plus money for staffing that would be needed, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
As well as food.
Yeah.
other-
And, you know, I think,
Mhm.
again, what we were bumping up into, we checked a number of hotels in the area, CDI, Red Roof, multiple extended stay locations. And the problem we were all bumping into was like, yeah, you can do rooms, but we can't guarantee them. So even with a week's notice, like, you know, whatever we have available is what we'll have available. So again, that's what we were bumping up with at CDI. All the places that we traditionally used is that problem.
So, Drew, we have some questions in the chat. So, Ebony is asking, with the 15 rooms, how many of those rooms would be dedicated to families? Would it just be the 5?
Because I believe last time it was 6.
Yeah, last time we did do a block of 20 rooms to start, and we're going to adjust it to 15 for this time. So it's still going to be that 20 to 25% number. That's for families, and I think it's also based on prioritization as well. Food, we're partnering with Sheldon and the Urban Ministry catering folks to have meals delivered this week.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is, from the last white flag event that we had, you had 20 rooms. That was a bit much. 15 is kind of where you guys are comfortable with as far as staff.
Correct.
I'm just
Yeah,
concerned that
correct.
15 is.
And I think too, with our timeline and trying to budget out the number of cold nights that we could potentially have, erring on the side of 15 right now. Obviously, if there's going to be like a winter storm event, we could adjust those numbers. But I think at this point, with the budget and how we're looking for the remaining months, 15 seems like the spot that we landed at.
Okay. Sheldon, do you have anything to add about, because Ebony had asked about the food, was that a smooth process?
Yeah, I mean, that works fine right now. I think if we were to say we're increasing these numbers, say like double or triple or something, then we probably need some assistance there. But right now, we're fine to be able to provide food for the numbers that we have.
So it sounds like, Colin, 15 is like our magic number all the way around, and we would need what? Manpower on Sheldon's side, manpower on the open table side, as far as staffing,
Mhm.
to be able to accomplish that. And then also the availability of at least the additional rooms to that 21, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm hearing is we kind of have a staff capacity issue. I see Russ has his hand up too. And Commissioner Carter has a question in the.
Sure, we can easily answer that question. I mean, there wasn't a church last 2 years, right, Colin? It's not in a church at this point.
Mhm.
So there's not a congregate white flag option. So my question, if I missed this being addressed, I apologize. What's our rate of utilization versus the numbers? Because I think that's something that's come up in prior conversations is, you know, even some of our past experience has been, they tell people that there are rooms available, particularly families, and families won't show up because they seem to self-resolve in many cases. So are we solving for a large wait list? Or are we solving for we have 15 rooms, but there are 6 other people standing waiting for rooms? What's the actual situation of utilization versus the numbers that are showing?
I think that's a great question, Russ, because I know, we set up for overflow. And I think oftentimes if there's somebody sent our way, they maybe don't show up. So we haven't had any takers for overflow since, but I guess it's only been a couple times now for White Flag this year.
We haven't tracked that data, but anecdotally, that is the case, Russ. There's certainly a number of folks that are no showing, and it's trying to prioritize after that. So I think we could clarify the process as well of how we're communicating those empty rooms when folks, because I would say it's families, but also a number of individuals also no show as well.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to, I just know the family piece is a bigger concern oftentimes. And I guess, Tammy, I mean, you all had mentioned capacity. Are we utilizing the additional emergency capacity at FMF at this point, or is it kind of like UMD?
We've made it available, but we've had a couple of families that have not shown up. And then we had one family that was rather large, and they wanted to bring their mom and dad and uncles or somebody, and we just couldn't accommodate that many people. But for the most part, we're ready for 3 more families, but the families just haven't shown up yet.
Is there, I'm not sure how to ask this, and then I'll be quiet. How do we put in the equation folks who are interested in a hotel room for a couple of nights, but not interested in being in shelter out of the cold? I mean, those are kind of 2 different pieces. And I mean, I even remember when the last hurricane came nearby, and almost three and a half years now, and the shelter opened up at Sears, there were folks who were like, oh, that'll be a better situation. And forgive me, Sheldon, being at UMD. So I'm gonna move to the old Sears. And it wasn't housing any new people, it was just people changing kind of vendors. I'm not sure how we put that in the equation as we think it through.
So I did just a real quick back of the envelope math that if we tried to do a non-congregate shelter for a month for every, this is just rough math, but for 30 days for 100, and so the 15 rooms plus another 125 rooms ish, so that you have 125 households that need spacing, you're looking at almost $300,000 a month in hotel rooms for 140 rooms. If you're trying to give everyone who's experiencing unsheltered homelessness space for the night, you're probably going to need somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 to 140 rooms. Because not all rooms are going to be double occupancy. Some families may need 2 rooms. So playing with it, using 140 as a high number, you're just shy of $300,000 a month in hotel cost. Then you're talking about a substantial increase in staffing and a substantial increase in food cost as well. So you might be closer to, Sheldon, Drew, help me on this, in the magnitude of $350, $400 a month for food and staffing and hotel rooms. Hold on, Sheldon, you're muted.
I was just saying thereabouts.
So
But I
using,
think going back to Russ's question, it feels like, you're not really needing to be at that magnitude to really accommodate those who are in need and willing to utilize what's available as far as the resource. I think it's just going to be some level of expansion that would allow for us to be able to accommodate folks who are truly going to utilize what's available.
if there were, go ahead, Commissioner Carter.
How'd you know I wanted to say something?
I can read your mind sometimes. No, I'm just kidding.
I popped in. I feel like I've missed a few beats here and I apologize. Just wondering, why did we switch from a more congregate approach to the non-congregate approach? And sort of question one. Question two,
Mhm.
what if we just tried to double the amount of rooms that, we're providing? So two questions.
So two very good questions. The answer to the first question is we got away from the non-congregate piece because the location really wasn't ideal. It wasn't accessible to folks who were mobility challenged. So there were times where we had folks like literally police, fire, bringing people in late at night, carrying them down the stairs. And then Open
Wow.
Table was having to call EMS to have somebody
wow.
carry them back out the next morning because they couldn't do the stairs.
Goodness.
And the other piece, I think Open Table and at least Trinity decided this wasn't working for them right at this point. Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed kind of like timing, things were starting to come back and needing to go a different direction this year. The
Yeah.
other piece was we were able to expand White Flag capacity substantially due to the COVID funds that came in. And we were able to continue it for one more year based on, like, we had to go dig into savings and figure out how to cover it for 1 year, and trying to keep it at the same big level. And then having a big cliff next year, it seemed better to scale it back down and do something smaller, but was still bigger than what we had pre-COVID. So that's how we kind of ended up at a smaller number of rooms, so that by the time we didn't have funding, we would have the ability, the cliff wouldn't be as large as losing 100 rooms or 100 space. It wasn't 100, but it was maybe 50 on a really crowded night. So we
So
scaled it
people
back
were
down.
coming in and utilizing the space. back
Mhm.
to work.
Mhm.
Another, I like your idea of, potentially trying to double the non-congregate space. The other option we could look at doing, and I don't know how to do it, would be whether or not there are other congregate spaces
Mhm.
out there that if
Mhm.
we had providers who were willing to stand up congregate space and, sort of say, all right, here's a seasonal allocation of money. And that's what we did last year with the non-congregate space. Was it was just open every night from December to end of March. So is there a way to sort of do that? That way it's not like we have a 48-hour, it's on call, get in while you can, because it might be open for 2 weeks and then shut down. This is offering that, but that would be assuming we had providers who had capacity and interest to stand up and bring on seasonal staff for that period of time. And we were able to find congregate, yes, sure, congregate space is much cheaper than individual hotel rooms, generally speaking, on a per night basis.
I mean, in my mind, back to Russ's question about the attractiveness of having a hotel room versus a congregate space, I feel like the congregate space is the better option, because we get to like the true need. If a person comes in congregate space, they need somewhere to be out of the elements. And that might be a wiser place to go as opposed to more hotel space. Now with families, I think that would be a challenge. So if there was a way that we could do maybe congregate space for singles and some additional non-congregate space for families, some kind of cocktail mix of kind of what that looks like, but not going over more than 10 rooms, or
And
something
that's
like that
that's
for
where we've been
families.
the last 2 years, and I think that's when we bump up to the overhead of doing a congregate shelter is so hard to start and stop. So we were running it for 90 days, and then doing a second site at a hotel, especially for folks like you said, Sharita, who are families or medically vulnerable and fragile. And I think it gets really hard when you start trying to do both, because one or the other is, a lot.
I imagine so. I was just trying to figure out if there was room or space or the opportunity to be able to do something like that as opposed to doubling hotel space. But because I think it's attractive if you know you can go stay in a hotel. You know, we had people coming to our area just because they knew they could stay in a hotel, and so I mean I think that's something that we just need to take into consideration and be very careful and mindful about that kind of investment.
Go ahead, Tammy.
I just wanted to say that now that we're a little bit more past COVID, a lot of our faith partners that used to be our Interfaith Hospitality Network are participating a lot more in the work that we're doing here. I would be happy to reach out to those congregations to see what their space is like, if they've got rooms, if they've got, a congregate setting, and we would be willing to beef our staff up a little bit to help accommodate if that worked out.
And so along those lines, just in a couple of conversations that I had with a couple of folks from different congregations, there would possibly be interest in them opening, but they did express that, they would need staffing supports because they don't see that they have the volunteers like they've had in the past. And also they didn't feel as comfortable at this point, just opening back up without staffing that would be there. So I think that those would be some options.
So we have some questions from a new person, a new community person. He's with the Heart Team, Mr. David Prater. Is that right, David?
Hi, yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Welcome. So he has some questions in the chat. The first one is, will space be available for entry 24 hours a day? That answer, I think for the non-congregate space that we have now, that answer is yes. I don't know if that would be the same consideration for the same option for congregate space. They would be coming in strictly at night. That's what we've done in the past, correct, Drew?
Correct.
Well, in the current the non-congregate space now is not available 24 hours a day to anybody because it's pre-planned. But once you're accepted in there, you can come and go because you have
Right.
a key. So it's not like you can just show up and be like, oh, here's a room. And then,
But a person can enter at any time of night. They don't have to be in by 8 p.m., for instance. They could arrive at midnight.
No, there's a certain check-in window.
yeah, they'd have to check in the first night to get in to the program. They'd have to check in during that window. After that, they could come in after any times they wanted to.
The second question was, is the space wet entry? Yes. Is that correct? Okay. What happens when the temperature raises above white flag? It closes.
Well, hold on. There is a little bit of a caveat on there because
Okay.
sometimes it'll be like 24, then it'll go up to like 37. And then like 2 days later, it'll drop back down in the 20s. So sometimes we'll keep that non-congregate space just open straight through because it's too much of a headache to shut down, find new people, and then reopen it again. It's just easier to keep it going as it is.
And so that's the last part of your question is about what is that? What happens in the temperature that a season-long congregate shelter could address all these barriers implemented appropriately.
So I guess I'm kind of thinking of like Healing Transitions program in Wake County that that offers congregate space, 24 hours a day. A person doesn't have to be sober to gain access, and that there's not something currently that's similar in all of those aspects in Durham. And those are barriers to entry that many people experience. During the last White Flag Night, we were driving around the city, and we would tell people, oh, there's warm shelter available at the Durham Rescue Mission, and folks would say, well, we'd rather be on the streets than go to the Durham Rescue Mission, or they're not willing to be, they're unable to currently be sober to gain entry there. There's a wait list to get into the county-based shelters, and then there's also time constraints about when they would have to arrive. And if we can eliminate some of these barriers, then the folks that are on the streets that need the help but aren't asking for the help might be able to also find safe harbor.
I agree with your sentiments, and I think this is an issue that we've talked over and over again about off and on. Just so you know, Durham Rescue Mission is private, so it's not a part of our continuum, so they can set and establish their own protocols and rules that we have no control over. Our current shelter capacity is folks can't be here during the day. They need to be actively out looking for housing, looking for work. Those things, correct, Sheldon? And then there are some considerations where they may allow somebody to stay inside, but it is not like forever. It's like time-based. Is that correct? Sheldon?
That's correct. And that does adjust like based on the temperature too. I mean, if it's cold, then yeah, there's some change in that. Or if it's raining and cold, inclement weather, we'll say.
I do think David's question raises an interesting point. Probably not for this immediate moment, but certainly for future planning. Are there model programs, across the nation that we want to try to emulate, that might get more people into shelter and lower barriers and that kind of thing. In the same way that, we're trying to emulate model programs and make them better, even as far as just crisis response goes, and the work of hearts. So.
And I think that, we've talked about that before, but it would take significant, of course, money and, true community partnership working, city, county government and the community to sustain something like that. It might involve us becoming a right to shelter community, like they have in New York. They have shelters everywhere. But that's like a community decision that has to be made, that we just don't, our continuum doesn't have the funds to be able to do it, unfortunately. But I think it's a worthwhile conversation that we need to have as a community. I think those home ARP funds was like a start on being able to talk about that and include the community in a process to come up with some other options for shelter or housing.
Yeah, I feel like our community has a fairly good track record with piloting innovative programs and then expanding them, like the Hearts program, for example. And I also don't know that council members and commissioners are fully aware of the need for more funding for just white shelter spaces in and of itself, but at a broader level, a right to shelter kind of approach. I would say, as a policy-making body, if there's a great policy or program, bring it forward, please. Don't not bring it forward because of lack of funding. You can always ask, right? And you can always fight for what we believe we need.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Lloyd in the department. Sheldon and Tammy, I understand that the shelters have recently modified some of the length of stay opportunities that people have in the shelters. And I'm curious how that is impacting the number of people cumulatively that the shelters, the number of households that the shelters are able to serve. Are you seeing faster turnover of beds and units in your shelters since you implemented those new policies? Shona may want to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, so I would say that we've noticed more faster exits and, you know, people self-resolving. And so what Lloyd's speaking about just for the group. So when folks come in, we're typically now setting like a 30-day exit. Now, just because you have a 30-day exit, that doesn't mean you can't get an extension. But, you know, really trying to set the mindset and the agenda that we're really trying to focus on getting people out in the housing or positive situation faster. This is not planned to be a 8, 10, 12 month stay here. And so I think staff have seen more people getting quicker resolution, oftentimes from their own efforts. So, you know, that helps the case management team, of course, because, you know, they're split across a large number of people, but there's a greater motivation there amongst folks to work toward getting resolved for their situation before being exited. However, you know, that there are a lot of extensions that happen, but, you know, if people are working towards their goals, not creating issues within community, those are very easy to have extensions, but it definitely has, I think, served as a motivator, and a lot more people are getting out quicker.
I would say that's the same here. We are seeing a lot more turnover, people self-resolving. When this new, when the new numbers came out, we decided that we were going to kind of reorganize internally to better support the families so that we could help them find housing quicker, find a job or job training. So we developed something like a multidisciplinary team approach to work with the families. And that's also been helping them to be a little bit more focused. We've restructured how we're doing our intake. So we're asking some questions and kind of setting the expectations right at the beginning. You know, we're a 30-day shelter. You know, you continue to work with us and we continue to help you in any way that we possibly can, then we may extend you. And so we're seeing a lot more involvement with the families, really trying to get out and self-resolve, and we're supporting that. We really want to see them do that. So I would say there's been some significant change in our turnover over the last several months since we've adopted that.
Thank you. I raised that question because I think our HMIS, Homeless Management Information System, suggests that over the last several years, Durham is not necessarily seeing over the course of a year more people experiencing homelessness than we were seeing some years ago. I think our shelter capacity, and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand our shelter capacity for emergency shelter has been pretty constant. Certainly have had some adjustments with the pandemic, but even there we tried to make accommodations. And so, you know, the data suggests that we're overall serving fewer people. I think we're all concerned about the increased numbers of unsheltered people, but hopefully if our shelters are moving people through more quickly, over the course of a year, they can also serve more households. So that I think would be encouraging to see. Didn't intend to end the conversation.
We were talking about the letter and we were coming up with some numbers. Just trying to figure out how we exhausted this conversation, or should we?
So it sounded to me like we were saying, could we double or somewhere in that vicinity consider for the non-congregate? And then we were going to explore congregations or another possible site for congregate. That's where I remember us leaving that off.
We got off, so I was trying to see where we were.
Commissioner
So
Carter,
you,
sorry,
go ahead,
Commissioner
Commissioner
Carter had a question. Currently, there's a total of $200,000, which has been allocated to White Flag. That started November 1st, 2020. No, was it November, Drew, or was it December? November. That was going to go through March 31st, or we may have carried it out to June 30th in case we had some cold April days and the money lasted. So if we doubled that, you would need to go to 400,000. And if we're
but that would be at.
It's
that would be
$40,000 a month. So right now we're spending about 40,000 a month.
It depends on the month. Drew,
Yeah,
Drew can
yeah,
probably
yeah.
give us a better idea.
Yeah, I'm
predicting,
sure that's
predicting the
right.
weather is anyone's game.
I just read something that said Wake County in November 2022 was, struggling with the same thing, and they increased their funding or something to like 200,000 per month. Of course, they're bigger than we are. So I don't know, how much bigger are they? 4 times our size or something? That'd be about right. I don't know. Anyway, sorry.
Just good question. I mean, if we wanted to look at an interim step, we could look at increasing the current White Flag budget. One city and or county would have to figure out who's funding it and how. And then whether or not we would need to go through an RFP project or an RFP process to put it out for bid, or if it would just be added to the current contract in place, because we'd have to justify whatever procurement process we go through. So if we're looking at having to do an RFP, if there's folks on this call or even in the community who could stand up a White Flag and increase capacity at $200,000 from here till, or prorated amount from January to end of March or April, we'd need to go through that process, which is going to take a good minimum of a month to get through an RFP process, even if we did a shortened 2-week process. That would be the challenge with doing it in this year. The long-term solution would be perhaps sort of making it part of the city's next potentially figuring out a way to sort of put it into our 3-year proposal where there's additional funding that could go out to providers who could plan and stand up congregate sites and or hotels. So it could be a way of nonprofit providers who do homeless services to sort of plan into their budget of hiring a bunch of staff, start a hiring process in the July, August timeframe, have a seasonal bump in staffing and partnerships with local churches and or hotels to stand rooms up. And that could be sort of put into like a long-term sort of annual use contract. Not sure we'd have the timing right to be able to do it for our next 3-year combined application or not, but we could explore that. Or we just do like a 3-year white flag contract to one or multiple providers.
There's a question in the chat from Sally about funds that were set aside for Project Access non-congregate shelter that didn't end up getting used. You see it, Colin?
I do. There might be a little bit of money. It wouldn't be a ton of money. And are you talking, so because you have money in contract now that goes through June 30th for COVID positive households. Are you talking about the money that was above that?
Correct.
Okay.
Also, I don't anticipate we'll spend the full award for COVID. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, I think we've looked at that. I think that had to be used somewhere else where we had a shortfall on something, but I'll go back and double check.
So are we preparing, just to make sure that I'm clear, are we preparing to come up with some tangible number now? Is that what our plan is right now? Is that the consensus of the group to go into a letter for an ask?
I don't know that we as a group need to decide on what the budget is. I think if we know what the plan is, then we can sort of come up with that tangible, a not to exceed dollar amount from that. But right now I'm kind of hearing that one is double the hotel capacity, add 200,000, if it's sort of saying, hey, let's take the hotel route and everybody wants to basically waive competition for $200,000 to do emergency shelter, and we can document that, then we could talk to Open Table and say, hey, would this might work? But then that may get into some of the food challenges that Shelton brought up. And we need to think through that. If all the funds went into one contract, would Open Table need to reimburse Urban Ministries, or would there need to be 2 separate contracts? There's some logistics on that end, but at the end of the day, right now, we just need to know what plan does the group want to go forward with and how quickly. And those are the 2 things that kind of determine the rest of it.
And at this time, I just kind of want to guide us there because we're about at our committed time. I mean, we do have space to continue to have this conversation, but I just want to be mindful of folks' time who might need to get off. Anybody?
I guess I have a question. So how simple is it or not to be able to provide Open Table with some additional funds now if they were going to be able to, say, if it was adding 10 more rooms or some smaller number of rooms versus and still look at what would be possible for next year, if that was something they felt like they could do.
So if I'm understanding correctly, Sheldon, you're asking what would the process look, or what would the timeline process look like if we were going to add just 200, add some money to Open Table's current contract?
Right, like
for
if they
this
did
year
another,
only,
right, if
while
they
we
needed
work on
another
the next one.
person or more for rooms, or is that simple or is that not doable?
It could be, it depends. We could put we'd have to find the money in the city budget to be able to add it to the contract. That would be if the city were going to do it. If the county had money and could easily do it, they could have a separate contract with Open Table to do it. And then that sort of gets into a little bit of wonkiness as well. But, we can figure, I think the county and the city can sort of talk and figure out that piece. The challenge is we would have to justify, because the city has a procurement process, that we have to put things out for bid, especially when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have in the past asked the city manager to sign off on a waiver of competition. When we've done that in the past, it's because the other emergency shelters in the community have been part of the process and part of these types of meetings where urban ministry said, you know what, we don't want to get into this right now. Families Moving Forward at the time said they didn't want to get involved. And even if the money were available, they weren't going to apply for it. So if we have everybody who's capable of doing emergency shelter saying, we don't have an interest in doing this, then I can document it and request a waiver of competition. If there's a group that would like to stand up some additional emergency shelter space and do it with a set aside of funding, we could look at that. We would just need to work it through. It's also going to take Open Table a little bit of time to scale up, especially if they have to hire some staff. And as anybody who's tried to hire recently, as we are, finding staff doesn't happen overnight. So it could take some time to get appropriate staffing levels up. If we're going up, I think Drew said if we went up to 20 or 21 rooms, that shouldn't be a problem staffing wise for them. And it may or may not be a problem for the hotel. But if we tried to go to 30 or 40 rooms, that may be a problem on the hotel side. And then it's a problem because there's no other hotel that can guarantee the rooms. And then that gets into a bigger staffing issue if you have to go rent 3 rooms at one hotel, 3 rooms at another, 3 rooms at another. And then it gets into the logistics of how do you get food to 7 sites potentially.
And fortunately, I would say that this is still fresh on our mind because this has been an ongoing, we've been trying to stand up these rooms for months communicating with hotels. So it's fortunately, there's still some feelers out there, and I still talk with plenty of folks at other locations that I think would be willing to work with us. But the more time to plan, the better, because we started having these conversations back in July or August, and it just takes a while to move things along.
Can I just ask for a review of kind of a numbers question? I'm still kind of back on utilization.
Yeah. Well, and then my other concern about the hotel plan, whereas I think it's a good idea on one aspect, I think it's a bad idea on another aspect, because I just feel like the need level is just going to increase because folks are going to hear that we have hotel space.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
So can I ask that question? I just want to see if I've got this right. I mean, this is probably going to have to go into some letter. So we're saying right now on a normal night, a normal White Flag night, Open Table would rent out 15 rooms. It's 6 for families and 9 for individuals. Is that right, Drew?
Correct.
Okay. And then FMF has added capacity for 3 families. Is that right, Tammy?
That's right.
And then UMD, when it adds additional capacity in a White Flag night, it's adding
12.
12. Okay. So we're adding enough capacity for, it looks like 9 families and 21 individual households. But we're still experiencing underutilization of that. I don't know if we have any way of, if I don't know that it'd be forthcoming, if DRM would tell us what capacity they're adding. I think we've had a hard time getting that information in the past. So is the idea to get us to being able to house half the families that are reporting at this point? Oh, sorry, Drew. Thank you. Drew noted there's not enough singles. So we actually have capacity for 30 individuals. Okay. And 9 families. So
I'm glad you're writing all this down because I need you to send it to me.
Hey, I'm not secretary of this group, Sharita.
Can I speak on utilization real quick? My So for the past couple of years, I've worked at the Detox in Durham, trying to help people get placed into housing. And currently I work on the HEART team and we're out in the community. And the experience I've had from a lot of the unsheltered individuals we work with is that they don't actually look at coordinated entry as a real option for them because of the wait lists. We would kind of use coordinated entry as a last resort if we weren't able to get them into anywhere else. And then with the fluctuation of White Flag Shelter being available, then it going away, and then it being available again, I think a lot of the folks that are most in need may not be aware of the availability when it becomes available and what the stipulations are regarding it. And so I think it's wonderful to hear, all that's being done. I'm just wondering if that information is reaching those most in need, because the need is out there. I can go find people to fill up every single one of these rooms right now, but do they know that these rooms are available, and can they get there, and is it feasible for them? And those are the thoughts that are going through my mind.
Well, and I would say, from a street outreach, since we work with street outreach, we do a lot of the communicating and coordinating some of those efforts, and information does very often get out. I do think a lot of times the attractiveness is if it's a hotel versus another option, and if folks are going to get, if you sign up, but you aren't sure which thing you're going to get routed to, the interest in signing up goes down a little bit. Because I know that there was some of that over the last 3 years easily, when we've been involved, when Open Table's been involved, that kind of piece. So not to dismiss what you're saying in any way, I totally get it, but it is this kind of like head scratcher of like, we've said these things are available, and even last year it was very, very stable, both the hotel option location and the non-congregate shelter option. I guess what I'm just trying to balance out is with these numbers is there's some really good ideas being discussed, and this is something we often have happen is there's these bigger picture conversations that need to also happen to like look to the future, like the piece that you've even shared, David, around some of the wet shelter idea. There's capacity in finances, capacity in like all of us figuring out how to do this. How much needs to go into an immediate piece versus some of these other conversations that could get us to long-term solutions?
I wish Nicole Lamb were on here for coordinated entry, because she has people calling unsheltered homeless, and they would qualify for they don't quite meet the qualifications for the non-congregate hotel, but they do definitely meet the qualifications for Liberty Street. And they'll be like, no, I'd rather stay unsheltered until I can get into a hotel. And I was like, okay. And if we go back to the pandemic, when the county rented the Marriott at RTP, we had a lot of people show up there. And then a lot of people stayed 1 or 2 nights and decided not to stay at the hotel because it was too far from their social circles and their other things that they needed to do on a day-to-day basis. So there was a good number of transition of folks who didn't like the distance. Then the folks who stayed at Marriott RTP either refused to go to an urban ministry space, and they didn't like the Carolina Duke Inn, so they chose either unsheltered homelessness or self-resolved. And now that we're in sort of another conundrum, people are kind of picky about, well, I don't think I like that hotel, so I'd rather be unsheltered, or I don't like this option to end my homelessness, so I'm going to choose unsheltered homelessness. Or I all of a sudden remember my great-great-grandmother's best friend's cousin's nephew's friend's dog walker who I could maybe stay with for a few days instead of this other option that you're giving me. It's fascinating. And this isn't the first community that I've seen these kind of decision trees happening with people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And I think you're right, Commissioner Carter, it is really fascinating, and it does kind of want to make you bang your head on the wall sometimes.
I have a question, and so you all have to forgive me. are we saying, because I heard you say some things about being able to bypass or get someone to do some other kind of thing with the bids. Does that mean that the congregate shelters are off the table? Or can we go that fast track route that you discussed so that we can put it on the table? And even if it's 2 weeks, we still have another, 12, 14, 16 weeks of white flag where we can accommodate. It sounds like, and I'm back to Russ's thing about numbers, we can accommodate 40, 50 people if we try to do something with that this year versus throwing the money into 10 more rooms. So I'm just trying to ask to see if congregate space should be off the table. And let me resolve the issue I have in front of me than worrying about the cliff in next year. We could have any other kind of funds from the feds or whatever might come through. But you gave us a number, 100 and something singles. We got a lot of people who are homeless. And so I'm just curious about how we can support the people in front of us right now and make a difference.
So I think the challenge with the congregate would be the space, and then I think the staff. I think that's the biggest thing, hiring the staff, and that's been a challenge for projects already. So you would have to have the space that's available, whoever that's going to be, and then they would have to staff it up. So even a church would be asking for staff to staff it up. So I think that's where that challenge is.
And that's my understanding. I was just saying, because we're asking Open Table to staff up as it relates to non-congregate. So no matter what we're asking, we have a staffing, we have resource issues around any of these solutions. So I'm just asking. I don't want to throw it out of the window. I want to see how can we fix some of this?
I mean, at this point, I think Families Moving Forward has, overflow capacity for 3 households. And that would kind of be on an as needed emergency only basis. And Sheldon, you guys have room for about 4 individuals? 12 that you could go up to. So the question is, to do that, would those 2 organizations need additional funds to make that happen on a night by night basis? And if you were going to try and do that every night, I'm not going to speak for you, but I will ask, would you need additional funds for food and staffing to take on that 3 and 12 at those shelters from now till the end of April?
I know we would.
We would increase the staffing.
Yeah, we would have to.
And is that something that would be possible to do in 30 days? If you knew a contract was coming and you might have to respond to an RFP, because now we're talking about 3 people who, Open Table might be able to go up 5 rooms to take on 10, Urban Ministries could take on 12, and Families Moving Forward taking on 3, and what would those costs look like? And then is there a way then I would have to do some research with our legal department and purchasing to find out if there's a way to waive competition if all 3 providers are standing up to meet an urgent need, and is there a way under exigent circumstances to put a contract in place? But we're talking about by the time contracts get done, those contracts won't get through city council until end of January, best case scenario.
Can't they just be a contract amendment? Can that go faster? And I definitely think we should start here. If Urban Ministries under Sheldon's leadership and Families Moving Forward under Tammy's leadership and Open Table under Drew's can expand by those numbers that you just mentioned, we could at least start there if we could do it quickly.
I don't know that I'd have to look and see what contracts are in place. Like Open Table, we could probably expand it. It's still going to have to go to city council because we're adding money to it.
Yeah, sure.
Any of them, we'd be changing funding sources on Families Moving Forward for emergency shelter. Urban Ministries, we might be able to do it. I'd have to look at it. We just have to make sure that all of the contracts would end at the same time frame. So if it's a totally, and it's adding a scope of work. We might, but it does either way. It's the same process. Adding money to it, because we'd have to adjust the scope of work for the cold weather, would be a little bit different than the expectations on regular non-congregate shelter. Maybe some slight modifications. And
Then
if you-
Commissioner Carter put in the chat that there was some emergency funds that the county had. So I was just wondering about that. Where does that put us?
Well, heck, the city and the county, we have a fund balance every single year for, emergency situations that arise that don't require ongoing funding necessarily. My opinion is this would qualify for that, but I'm one voter, but still, I just think that would qualify, and it's not much money. We're not talking about that much money. I see things come forward that are more money, and they get approved as an emergency or not. So
let's how about if Sheldon, how about if we take this as the next step? If Sheldon, Tammy, and Drew could kind of put together a budget and what the number of households served would be, and get that to me, how much time would you guys need to kind of figure something out to take care of those numbers through the end of, let's call it end of March, mid-April?
So now, are you saying continuous or only on the called
I
white
think
flag?
I think if we're going to do it, if we're going to do non-congregate, I think we would need to sort of be able to say, let's make, well, I'll defer to the group. I would say doing it straight through every night probably makes it a little bit easier, especially if you're staffing up and bringing additional staff in. It's sometimes hard to find staff and saying, hey, with 48 hours, you need to be here overnight. When people are like, oh, wait, I've got hockey tickets or football tickets or basketball tickets, or I want to go hang out with my friend, they might not be able to do it. And holidays and weekends and things like that, where people may not want to do it. It would basically be just sort of, it would be kind of an overflow non-congregate, no, overflow congregate for the white flag season.
And so that would include also switching open tables model from a white flag only model to a continuous model as well? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I don't know. That's what I think I'm talking about the two congregate shelters.
Okay, you're speaking
talking about-
specifically to UMD and FMF.
FMF,
Okay,
about
okay.
whether or not that needs to be continual. If they're planning to bring on additional staffing, at least in my mind, it might be easier to keep UMD and FMF open every night from here till the end of cold weather season. If we're talking about making open table open every night during these nights, then that's a substantial investment of funds of, I'll have to try and do some rough math on it, but we can look at it. I just need to know kind of what we'd like to do. And then I can sort of float it up through our channels and see what's possible and see if there's a way to do it. And we would just sort of need to figure out if there's a way to waive competition to amend contracts without having to go through an RFP process.
Commissioner Carter, are you clear what he's proposing?
I think so.
Okay, I just
mean,
saw your message.
I was not, right. I feel a little clearer now. I guess it does raise another question in my mind that we don't have to get into now, but it's like, well, gosh, if we have the capacity to have additional emergency shelter all the time, why don't, can we just do that also at Urban Ministries and Families Moving Forward with additional funding, So anyway, just never mind. My mind's going in circular directions right now.
Sheldon and Tammy, you guys think that's a good idea?
I think that we can pull some type of a budget with an end date in sight. We could definitely do that. I have a question about how quickly we would be able to utilize the funding. So we know that an RFP process would be taking too long. So Colin, is it possible if we tapped into these funds that Commissioner Carter's talking about, if we could do something like an MOU with the city or the county, and we had our scope of work attached that outlined what we could contractually agree to? Would that work instead of having to do a waiver to an RFP process?
Either way, it's going to have to convert to a contract.
Yeah.
Either way. And the RFP, I just need to figure out, I don't have a clear answer. I think I don't know whether we could waive competition or not. In my very simple, non-lawyer, not talking to anybody above me, there might be a way to do it. There might be a path to waive competition on this under exigent circumstances or some other way, but I'm not in a position right now to definitively say we can or we cannot waive this without having some other conversations and making sure that, city attorney and procurement purchasing are on board with it, because we would still have to go to the city manager and get the city manager to authorize a waiver of competition.
Okay.
Having this type of discussion with everybody in the room helps to make a case that you could do it. We would just have to ensure that there's nobody out in the community who could also do this type of work who might be interested in doing it if an RFP went out. I think we could reasonably say there aren't any other emergency shelter providers in the community who could stand this up, who also have to have access to HMIS and some of the other requirements that you have to have. I mean, you would have to be up and running and have every duck in a row to be able to pull it off in the timeline that we're looking at. So I think there's a good case to be made. Whether or not that argument for waiving competition would stick or not is a decision that's not mine alone to make.
So what kind of turnaround do you need for these budgets and this personnel to you? Do you want us to add a scope of work in there so that you can take it to your higher ups?
No, I think we would just use I think we could use just the basic emergency shelter scope of work for the cold weather season. My thought is we would try and keep the contracts and scope of work as similar to the open table contract as possible for this. If we're able to amend contracts, it gets a little bit tricky. I'd have to look at each of the contracts that UMD and FMF have with the city and see if there's anything that would change. Because if we put something in and the scope of work changes the date and you have a contract that ends December 31st of next year, and this has to end in April, we'd have to sort of look at it and figure out how do we split that, or do we add more money and add more money to it so that it covers the cold weather of November and December of next year.
Yeah, I think ours would be a whole different bucket of money because ours would be primarily CDBG, so that wouldn't fly.
Right, and that's the other piece is for you, you're funded with CDBG funds, and then you've got a rapid rehousing contract. So we would have to amend the CDBG contract to add a separate funding source and a separate scope of work for that separate piece, and figuring out whether or not, actually we couldn't amend that contract because that contract came out of an RFP 3 years ago. So it would be a new contract for families moving forward.
Yeah. Why can't it ever be easy? That's all I want to know.
Well, there's some things that could be easy. There's some things that there's a process in place for a reason.
Well, there's a will, there's a way.
We can figure it out. It's just a question of, if you all can get me, how much time do you think you would need to get some numbers to me?
I could have some numbers to you by Friday.
I was going to say tomorrow, Wednesday, it's only a couple items in here from our standpoint.
And scaling up 5 rooms is what we decided on the non-congregate side?
I think it's what do you think is possible, Drew? I don't
Yeah, I
think
mean, I
we
think 5
said-
is reasonable with the availability at Hometown Suites and staffing. That's, I mean, I think I could get that this afternoon. Would be fairly straightforward.
Okay, so would you need staffing as well, Drew?
No.
Okay. So we're talking about scaling up 5 rooms at OTM, 3 slots at FMF, 12 slots at UMD. The FMF and UMD would be open every night during the cold weather season, correct? Not just on those white flag nights.
Yeah.
Sheldon? Yes?
Yeah, so I would want to talk with Shauna
Okay.
a little more about that before
Okay.
saying that's the agreement.
Okay. So
Drew,
FMF,
what is Hometown Suites charging you per night?
I'd have to check. I want to say 52. They gave us a special rate, so they were able to lock in a rate with us. I want to say 52 for a single room and 59 for a double. That includes taxes and fees.
Okay.
And it is kind of hit or miss. Like doubles are much more flexible because we can use those to double up singles, or we could also use those for families. But it's hard, you know, given their availability and our turnaround when we call white flag to know what always is going to be available.
Okay.
and then do we want to look at turning the current open table white flag rooms into open every night during cold weather season, or keep those hotel rooms only on the really cold nights? Because that's
Drew, can we get some feedback from you on that idea?
I think my gut reaction is that turning it into an every single night, that changes the nature of white flag. It is like we are putting people up through the entire cold weather season, which is fine. It's something we've explored doing in the past, and we've always erred on the side of, I think, given what folks have shared about the nature and the approach to hotel rooms, knowing that there's a check-in and a check-out window, I think is helpful for all parties in order to encourage folks to self-resolve and move along. If we're saying, hey, here's a room between now and March 31st, I think it just changes the scope and the nature of the work. That's my kind of.
I agree with that.
That's my
personal.
That's my personal opinion, and I think it's going to be significantly much more expensive if we're talking about doing 20 nights of shelter. I mean, we could do some quick math. I know Colin's good at that. You can do the napkin math on that real quick, and that's going to be much more expensive than doing 5 more nights. I mean, and just take a look at the weather. We're calling white flag for Wednesday night. The next night it's going to get warm again. Is in above 32 is forecasted in January. So I mean, this is going to be blocks of nights already. It just adds up quick.
Good point.
I tend to agree with Drew on that, on using hotel only on the really, really cold nights, because then you start setting up the perverse incentive of, oh, no, I'm not coming in out of the cold unless I get a hotel room. Well, it's okay. Urban Ministries and Families Moving Forward have slots available. So you fill up your non-congregate first, and then, or you fill up your congregate first, then use your more expensive option as the backup. But then you have the perverse incentive of people hanging out and waiting until, like, has it filled up yet? Has it filled up yet? Which I've seen in another area I've worked in before. But people are people, and people are interesting. And, you know, the best we can do is put together some numbers, and I will float it up my ranks and see what the possibilities are to make something happen.
I like this plan. Thank you, Open Table, FMF, and Urban Ministries for your willingness to do this.
Thank you for taking the lead, Sharita.
And then Sheldon, you'll let me know whether it's an every night or only on really cold nights. Tammy, you're definitely every night.
Yeah, we can do every night.
Okay. And then Drew will stay only on cold nights. All right, so families moving forward, FMF, UMD, and Open Table will get me some budget numbers and break it out. Staffing, break it out where you can, and then I'll kind of a way of going about it. And would the folks on this call be comfortable doing a waiver of competition? Is there
I think for the XB, so that we can move as fast as we can on this, I don't have a problem with that.
is there anybody else on this call who's interested in doing white flag and or know anybody who may be in a position to do white flag, have space and experience and access to HMIS who's not on this call that we can think of?
Sally, y'all are not interested, right? Sally?
Well, the question Colin just asked was about white flag. So I think white flag versus ongoing versus sustained winter emergency shelter are two different things for us.
The only other place that I think about is, and I haven't talked with them in some time, but Healing with Care. You know, I know they got that big old auditorium space there.
It won't pass a fire inspection. We looked at that for something else and we looked at doing the renovations that it would take. The auditorium space doesn't have a fire egress out the back.
Okay.
And they're not in the HMIS system. So that would be to get the special use permit, the fire permits, which we went through that process once.
Okay. I'd forgotten about that.
But I appreciate you thinking of them, Sheldon. And then Sally, you were saying ongoing winter shelter. Do you have a place or a way to do ongoing winter shelter in a congregate fashion? Because it sounds like the ongoing winter shelter would be in a congregate setting, not in the white flag one-off hotel rooms. Or are you thinking about doing white flag on the one-off hotel rooms?
I just asked because I was thinking of any other, entity that might consider, so.
And I want to make sure we open it to anybody we can, so that.
Well, I think, unlike FMF and UMD, we don't have our shelter, our shelter program is neither congregate nor non-congregate. And not funded by the city and county.
Right, but I was thinking about it from a perspective of medical vulnerability and being able to serve a few more people that are medically vulnerable, potentially in a white flag capacity. That's the only reason why I asked.
Yeah, we would consider it, but it would have to be whether, the city and county were willing to work with us.
To do, what are you thinking, Sally?
To do additional beds, but probably sustained, not white flag for the winter season.
So would you stand up hotel rooms, or how would you run your emergency shelter?
That's the question.
We got to have a plan for being able to do it. So if you have a plan, I'm happy to look at it and see if it's
Colin,
possible.
I appreciate that, but since I was literally just asked 5 minutes ago,
Yeah.
I don't, would appreciate a few minutes to
Yeah,
actually.
absolutely.
Because yes, we do both. We do hotel rooms and we do rooms in shared locations, which mean they're sort of, I don't know how y'all consider that, right? There's not exactly, it's sort of more congregate in terms of, so I guess that would be the group. How would you consider a room in a shared house when it's a shared bedroom, shared kitchen, shared living space? So is that congregate or non-congregate?
So I guess are you talking about in a rooming house or what?
Yeah.
In a rooming house, the big question comes down to whose name is Project Access leasing the room, that it's yours, or is it leased in the client's name?
No, it's in our name.
So it's yours, and you can move people in and out as often as you want without having to go through the rooming house. Like you have a master lease on it and you can move.
No, we just pay for rooms as we need them.
Okay. Thoughts, anyone? And do you have them on, would you have X number on short notice, or is it kind of only if there's rooms available?
Well, I'll put it this way. We have never had a problem getting a room.
Okay. So we just went through the whole thing on the rooming house and whether or not they qualify as emergency shelter or transitional. And it would depend on what set of rules we're using. If we're just using city rules, we could probably define it however we want. If we're using federal rules, rooming house, especially if the name of the room is in the client's name, not in Project Access's name, then it might be considered a transitional house versus an emergency shelter.
So that's fine, but HUD has, at any point in which community development would want to review the HUD guidelines that I've forwarded to them to have this discussion, I'm open for it.
Okay. We will go back and relook at them again. So I thought we'd resolved that a while ago, but I'll go back and check my
Well,
notes.
we resolved it from my perspective because HUD said, yes, they're medical respite beds, they're emergency shelter. But it sounds like from your perspective, it has not been resolved. It
depends on how we do it, how it's set up. So we'll look into it. So put your hat, if you want to put something together, if you want to get some numbers or proposal together, we can work through it and figure out a solution. Because if we're using local funds, we have a little bit more flexibility if we're using different rules, if we write it that way. It makes it a little challenging on some level, but it makes it possible on another level. So let's take a look at it and see what we can do. No promises, but we'll look at it. It sounds like maybe an RFP might be the best way to go. We'll put together proposals, send them to me, and I'll see what I can do and see where we need to go. If we're getting 3 providers, it may be 3 or 4 providers doing this. It may be tough to justify a waiver of competition. So we'll figure it out.
When you get back to us and let us know what you find out about this piece, please, as soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as I have all the numbers from folks, I'll have something concrete and be able to run it up through the various food chains and kind of get legal and procurement, everybody to weigh in on it and figure out the path forward. So I will do my best and get it done.
Well, thank you so much. We didn't get to our other items on the agenda. But I think this is a worthwhile conversation. And I think we have a plan going forward. So that is like exciting. Helen, did you have any questions? Because I know that you really wanted us to have a plan, but I think we were talking about future stuff as well. So
Well, I'm more concerned right now with this year, obviously, it's like everyone else says, and then we can start working on next year, of course. But yeah, I mean, we have a plan, and how soon can we get a letter and where we need to go?
I think once we get these numbers back, if we get these by, I'm hearing sort of Friday this week, that gives Monday, Tuesday to get a letter. I'm going to be out Wednesday through the end of the year. So
You're gonna
Hey,
be out
Colin.
Wednesday through the end of the year, next Wednesday.
Wednesday, the 21st.
Okay, don't say Wednesday. You got another
Sorry.
week.
Yeah.
Hey,
Sorry.
Colin.
I'm just thinking through like all the things that we need to do and timelines. I was going to try and see my family who never sees me, and they're getting a little bit upset with, where's my daddy and why don't we see him?
Hey, Colin, I can get you my numbers by the end of the day. I've just done some rough sketches here, so I can get them to you quicker.
That's fine. And I think Sheldon said he could get numbers by tomorrow or Wednesday. So the sooner I get them, it gives me a little bit more time to
Yeah.
push it through. As soon as I get those, Helen, we can draft a letter for you to sign. And we'll just sort of have a not to exceed dollar amount to request some help from.
Right.
And we can send it to, we'll figure out if it needs to go to city or county. If it seems like city might be able to extend contracts, that'd probably be easier than having to put an interlocal agreement in place where the cost sharing happens and money has to be transferred, because that's a whole other process.
All right, sounds good.
But let me check and see. Yeah, look into this. All right.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I was gonna ask, I know that the last item on the agenda was updates for us from Colin. Can we get that through email just to be submitted to all of us?
Can you do that for us, Colin?
I think I can do that.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, it looks like we have had our conversation. I just want to thank everybody for their time and for logging in today and sharing. And I'm glad we came to a resolution, hopefully, and that our letter will go out soon, and we'll get this matter resolved for the winter 2022-23. Take care all.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.